I think one does think with one's hands. And I think that's why a keyboard is not a good place for me to think. Some people think very well on a keyboard. And I need this kind of the fidgeting of charcoal or scissors or tearing or something in my hands, as if there's a different brain that is controlling how that works. There's an uncertainty of what you're doing, an imprecision, so that what you do when you look at it is not know something in advance which you're carrying out, but rather rely on recognizing something as it appears. So it's not that I'm better at recognizing 8 pieces of paper as a horse than anyone else. What I do is allow myself the luxury of saying, this is going to be the way I'm going to spend months and years of my life, is arranging stupid pieces of paper and saying, a horse, every day as if it's something fresh. Okay, here we take a pause for lunch. Come on, Tamino. Yeah, come on. There are different ways that the families come into the work. Sometimes Anne is literally in the films. Sometimes things work in a different way. When they were children, when they were small, for every birthday I would do a puppet show, improvising puppets out of objects that were in the house. And this continued until they begged me to stop. They'd much rather wanted to watch DVDs or listen to music. But a lot of the impulse and the kind of ways that puppets were improvised became the basis of a lot of substantive work afterwards. The principle of the puppet shows for the children's birthday party was that the puppets could only be made on the morning of the birthday. Partly so that I had an excuse. While cakes were being baked, I could be busy making the puppet show. And they're very simple. I mean, they're a doll's dress stuck on top of a corkscrew with a bread roll squashed onto the top. And then the corkscrew arms can lift, and the dress can swirl, and the bread can be eaten by a glove puppet that's a giant. When I came to make the sculptures later, they were constructed the same way, out of found objects, whatever things were immediately at hand. And often when you work without that pressure of expectation or of end result, things happen in a light way that are actually much better than things that are heavily considered and worked over and traumatized over for a long time. Something can move from one form into another. So the same image can exist in a tapestry, a sculpture, a drawing, a performance on stage. I like the fact that a tapestry is like a frozen projection, a portable mural that you can roll up and carry to your next palace. A tapestry also is pixelated. It's not a brush mark. It's made up of a series of very discrete stitches, the decision every single thread. The way of making the tapestry is working across these lines of thread, slowly making a journey of completing the tapestry from blank series of warp threads to a completed image.
This is William Kentridge's tapestry, and from the beginning it's a map from here, and then up here it's still a map, but the only thing that we can see it's people walking. So I think if you're having a problem from this side, then you can move from this ocean to another ocean to look for green pastures. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm not really sure.
And there's not necessarily a hierarchy that the one is a sketch towards the other. The tapestries aren't a sketch towards the projection in the opera. The opera is not a staging what exists in the tapestry. at first this was just a byproduct of the work, or this was a mistake, I should be doing one or the other. Now I understand, or for me it's very important, that the multiplicity, the excess, the drowning excess of the image in its different iterations is part of the work itself. The video installation, I Am Not Me, The Horse Is Not Mine, is a series of 8 projections in one space running at the same time, which have to do with the chaos of 8 films happening at once. It's about kind of a heightened energy, which one has a sense of in that early period of Soviet art making. But which also includes the society tearing itself apart, the Communist Party ripping itself up during the purges and the Great Terror of 1937 and 38. But it's really about comedy and tragedy. The history of the 20th century is that many people's downfall does not have to do with their own weaknesses, but through being completely smashed by huge forces around them. And sometimes kind of the universality of laughter rather than the particularity of tears is a better way of approaching these huge social shifts and changes.
I think you should be on the screen for that. I think
Won't you go to the part where he's throwing the paper and just have a look if I pick it up on this halfway line? We'll do it twice, so we let it run here. Live performance, either with or without a projection around me, starts to become more important. There's a sense of the possibilities it opens up. For the last several months, in fact, the last couple of years, I've been working on a project which is related to the nose. Both the short story and the opera tell the history of one collegiate assessor Kovalyov, who wakes one morning and finds that his nose has disappeared. Now, Kovalyov... This is a section of I Am Not Me, The Horse Is Not Mine. And the title comes from a Russian peasant saying, denying guilt. If you're accused of something, you'd simply say, I am not me, the horse was not mine. In other words, I didn't steal the horse. The different fragments. I mean, we've got how to put the different pieces of Shostakovich, Gogol, the history of the Russian Revolution, to put all these... I am only an artist. My job is to make drawings, not to make sense. So it's material that's been excavated while working on the opera that then has its own place. Who wrote these notes? None of these notes make any sense to me at all. So it's a footnote to the opera, or an essay about the opera. But you must understand, it's very hard for me to die. But in some ways you can turn it on its head and say the whole opera production is simply a provocation to arrive at this piece, because in fact the opera has 7 performances. After that, that's it. Whereas this already has had a much longer life than the opera will ever have. Stalin, and it's easy for us to go on living, brackets, noise in the room, prolonged laughter. In the nose, you're very aware of it being about a hierarchy in Russian society, a hierarchy of bureaucrats, but also a hierarchy of the world. The Tsar, the patriarchs, the aristocracy, peasants, Jews and Muslims, animals, plants, and stones. And there's a kind of absurdity in that. That rings a bell with anyone from South Africa, where we had a kind of crazy hierarchy also, our own great chain of beings until apartheid ended, with whites, and then below whites, Asians, then there would have been Indians, then mixed-race people who were classified as coloreds, and below that, Africans. This extraordinary nonsense hierarchy made one understand the absurd not as a peripheral mistake at the edge of a society, but its central point of construction. So that the absurd always for me is a species of realism rather than a species of joke or fun. And that's why one can take the joke of the nose very seriously. Okay, can you carry it that you're slightly further back in it? The legs are closer to the back of it. Yep, that's it. That's better. And stop, and look, swing around. Further, and hold it there. It's a stretch and slide, and then a quick foot across. And keep looking the other way, so you're looking over your shoulder, so to speak. No, other way, there. Okay, Frank, let's see if you give yourself more self-importance. So when you're walking, it's got a kind of hump. It's more like an elephant walk. It's got a... And you can emphasize that in the actual, your arms can act as like the belly of it, so that it actually...
I have it. It's another world in there, right?
It's another world in there.
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
It's okay. It's on your nose. Okay. Hi, very pleased to meet you. Just to remind you all, the story is written in 1837. Gogol writes the short story The Nose, and which the young Shostakovich, who's 22 when he writes the opera, wrote in 1928. And there are two themes. There are two themes that we follow in the story that are in the opera. The one is one theme which Gogol is writing about is the terror of hierarchy. And the other theme, of course, is the person divided. In terms of the actual staging, what I'm interested in is telling as clearly as possible the story of the man who's separated from his nose and who looks for his nose. So you only have a handkerchief. You don't need an actual nose. If you think the way a chicken moves, sudden sort of stillness is anyone looking at me, or am I unobserved? Oh my God, my nose. So those kind of quite to let that start coming. Yeah. Just if you put your foot above the top railing, there, and then you do the big turn. So you start with your hand down, Paolo, when you're wheeled on. And there's always discovery in the making. I mean, that's the principle. The making has to be loose enough and open-ended enough for there to be a place for discovery. Let's do it again, just because it's actually faster. There's less time than we thought. Maybe we have to cut one of the turns out.
It timed out well if he'd done the first burr burr with the butt up, and then drop the hand on the second burr burr.
To us.
Скачет у меня